Graveyard shift workers. What crazy, creepy, unbelievable thing have you seen working in the dead of night? I used to work in this building as a staff of a nonprofit one night. The security guard called out sick and I was the only one to take his place. Why this building stayed open until 10 p.m., I don't know, because everyone went home at 7 p.m. at the latest. Anyways, the building was big and old-fashioned even though the company owned one side. All I had to do was sit at the desk, watch the cameras, and lock up once 10 p.m. came around, and wait for the truck drivers to pick up some artwork. So, it's almost 10 and the truck driver's on his way. The older elevator starts to move. It's on the 5th floor and it starts coming down. I'm freaked the fuck out because no one's on the 5th floor. I saw the last person go home 2 hours ago, so I grab the baton and go upstairs to investigate. Since the elevator's in motion and I'm fucking scared of it, I take the large staircase. As I'm going straight up to the 2nd floor, Mez, the lobby has an old ceiling. I hear footsteps that sound like heels down in the lobby. I rush back downstairs thinking I never locked the front door, but it's not open. The elevator door opens and no one's inside. I thought it was maybe my boss fucking with me, so I started to call out his name while walking up the stairs. No one was on the 2nd floor, so I continued up the stairs. Then I hear the elevator move again. It's on the way to the 5th floor. When I get to the 3rd floor, the creepiest of them all. Seriously, it's those dark wood walls. The elevator stops above and I hear footsteps. I finally get to the 5th floor and no one's there but some creepy fucking statue at the end of the hall. I can't believe I even had the guts to close up the floor and leave. So I get past the 4th floor and I'm back on the creepy 3rd floor and I almost shit my pants at the sight of something moving in the corner of my eye. No big deal, probably a roach. Keep going. The truck driver will be here soon. Nope. I look again and the outline of a skinny kid with messy hair runs by the door of the president's office at the end of the hall. Then I remember, fuck, I didn't turn off the lights. As I find some massive balls and pick them up, I move towards the president's office, and the elevator starts moving again. There's footsteps in the staircase at the same fucking time. I start to break down and cry right there in the hallway. I have no idea what to do, so I run into the meeting room and cower near the window because if I see that fucking kid or something else in the building, I'm ready to jump. I hear the elevator door open on my floor and my name being called out softly. I scream, "Leave me alone!" The footsteps are getting closer to the meeting room. The door opens. I don't look because I had my eyes closed. I grab the baton and as soon as I swing, some force stops it. It's the fucking truck driver. I was so relieved to see him that I collapsed into his arms and bawled for a minute. He got me all cleaned up, helped me close up, and gave me a ride home. Right as we got down the street from the building, he turned to me and said, "You didn't know that place was haunted?" Jim, who's my boss, has been talking about Tommy for years. Turns out Tommy was a boy who died of pneumonia in the home in the early 1900s. When I looked at one of the historical books we had on the mansion, the skinny kid with shaggy hair was in it. Seriously, fuck that place. Around 12 years ago, I was working security at a small company headquarters in New York City. My partner for the night was called in sick, so I had to work from 12 to 6 all by my lonesome. Now, normally, this would not be a problem. I just had to sit in the back room, watch some cameras, and occasionally head out for a sweep. Nothing to it, right? Well, as it turns out, one of the employees had stayed in the building after hours and had managed to avoid my coworker's sweep from the previous shift. I first noticed a movement in my peripheral vision and one on the screens, and then again a few minutes later. This was odd because I was used to quiet nights in this particular building. I was a little scared when I headed out for my sweep, but it was my job. So I grabbed my flashlight and headed out to begin. I had this start of the sweeping in one big hallway. and right as I entered, I saw a flash of movement at the end. At this point, I was sufficiently freaked out. I stood frozen for a moment or so, looking into the seamlessly dark, unsure of what to do. The decision was taken out of my hands, however, as I heard a gunshot resound down the hallway. In what was the scariest moment of my life, I slowly walked down the hallway to investigate. I reached the end and saw to my left that the president's office light was on. Slowly, I approached the door and creaked it open, scared shitless. What I saw will forever haunt me. The man had taken a seat in the president's chair and shot himself in the head with a pistol, splattering blood and brains all over the floor and wall. This guy was having problems at home, and because the president was supposedly a total a-hole to him, he decided to off himself and scare the crap out of the president at the same time. In any case, I threw up a few times and called the police. I got the next 2 weeks off, and I still have nightmares about this. In 2 parts due to wordiness. Part 1. Nobody has gone the paranormal route yet, so I'll step in. I did an AMA a couple weeks ago about a painter and a decorator for my city council. This was one of the stories that did not get posted here. Just before I begin, based on my experience in the aforementioned AMA, for American readers, a council is like a localized authority in charge of housing, education, waste disposal, and that kind of thing. Council tenants are usually low-income renting a low-cost property from the said council. This story isn't about the tenants, but the council itself. One of the council admin buildings in this particular city is an old Victorian tower block converted into offices. Converted badly, I should add. Most of the offices are open plan, sectioned off into departments for those ubiquitous separator panels, and there's a general air of boredom. The contractor met me at a building and showed me the job, which needed to be completed at night after both day and evening shifts have finished. The reason was that the room to be decorated was the smoking room, where all the councilor workers skulked off for their cancer stick fix. The room is one of the top floors, tucked away along a narrow corridor and the refectory. The corridor sort of slopes upward, as though the architects did not quite think about how they were going to incorporate this bit into the general layout of the modern office. Anyways, it's a strange part of the building. The floor starts to slope up and turns a couple corners, past some old toilets and then past an old arched window, narrow and small enough to be glazed arrow loop. It's grimy and covered in dead flies and cobwebs. This is the precursor to an ancient door, originally to the building, covered in peeling brown paint with the consistency of dead skin. There's very little light here except what's oozing through the ochre-colored glass of the window, so this one's creepy little stretch of corridor. I'll just add here that in Britain at least, smoking rooms are pretty much a thing of the past. If you want to smoke these days, you have to go outside on your break or lunch and puff away in the cold. This was about 10 years ago. Back to the story. The door opens onto a small cramped room with a strange angle where a previously oddly shaped space has been incorporated into a more modern square. There are a couple small windows up near the ceiling, but too high to see out of, and a skylight showing nothing but the night sky. A beautiful blue carpet has been thrown Hazzard fashion on the floor, so some edges don't reach the walls and others ruck up, where there's too much around the wall. And all around the outside edge of the room are a variety of chairs of all shapes and sizes. Thrones for the smokers to occupy, I assume. The ceiling is a metal fabrication with polystyrene tiles and has seen better days. Some of the tiles are missing, others are broken and hanging outside the metal frame. Everything, and I mean everything, is covered in gross yellow nicotine. The chairs, the walls, the ceiling tiles, the insides of the door handle, everything. The contractor helps me to get tools into the place despite a bucket, a sponge, and several bottles of cheap bleach. My task was to clean off the nicotine and then paint the room. He leaves me alone. In this little nook of a room at the top of an old Victorian building in the middle of the night with floors of empty office space below me, and not even the comfort of a security guard in the foyer. I have a key code for the front door if I want to go back in. I can't convey how eerily creepy this job was. I had to replenish the water in my bleach bucket regularly, which required a hike to the toilets one floor down, through the partly lit refectory. Going wasn't so bad, but coming back past along those gloomy passages, past the arched window with its graveyard flies, and then to the peeling flesh door was a horrible experience. Opening the doors and going into the room of nicotine with its circles of chairs staring into nothing in the middle of the room, and its black eye skylight. Its crumbling polystyrene tiles was definitely the worst. I tried to kill the atmosphere by putting on a radio, which was okay when I was beavering away in the room. But when I had to get to the more water and approach the peeling pane of the door, it sounded too much like somebody else was in the room, murmuring away to themselves, and I had to switch it off mentally. About 3 in the morning, I'm starting to flag. I've prepped for this job in no way and had just intended to stay up all night and then sleep the next day. But I've already been awake for a whole day, so the lead-in weight of the tiredness is dragging me down. I've always put what happened from then on down to the wariness of an overwhelming urge to crash in one of the chairs and fall asleep. So, it's about 3 a.m. I decide to break the silence by having some sandwiches. I dump my bleach-soaked rag in the bucket. The water's so thick with nicotine it's become almost like a brown sludge. I grab my packed lunch and head down to the refectory. I eat my lunch in silence, watching the flickering fluorescent at the end of the room as it throws the shadows of vending machines up and down the wall. Empty office spaces like this take on a strange atmosphere at night. Night security guards will probably get what I mean. You feel suddenly like it's not just the building that's empty, but the world. Like you're in some kind of void emptied off into the original purpose and kept in the original state only to convince you, the one observed there, that this is not some alternate dimension of loneliness, but an office awaiting the arrival of the next shift. Time also takes on strange forms. The next shift is due to start only in a few hours, but it feels like it may never start, like this place will just always be empty and pointless with its flickering bulb and sullen silence. So, having a snack doesn't help much. It's depressing, I feel oddly hollow and send my girlfriend a text in an attempt to make some human contact. I feel like an idiot as soon as I hit send. The contractor was only here a few hours ago, and before that, I spent the whole day off and about, surrounded by people, but it's as if none of that happened, or it happened a long time ago, and I've been locked in this limbo of waiting building for months. Back to the nicotine room and back to the job. It's now about 3:30 in the morning. I've moved another side of the room where it's darker. The one bulb does not reach here, so I plug in a lamp and point it at the corner. I catch movement in my peripheral of my eye above my head. I glance up and see somebody standing outside the skylight. White legs and boots, but the legs fade to nothing and disembodied and sort of floating. I back up terrified and watch as the legs walk away. It takes a few seconds before I realized all I've seen is the reflection of my legs in the glass, illuminating up by the lamp. I feel stupid and jumpy as hell. I can't believe how much more I've still got to do in this room and how many more hours until I can quit. The place stinks of bleach and I can feel nicotine seeping out of my pores. I just want to go home. So I do. I say fuck it and go home. Down the empty building into the lift of the foyer, which is lit but empty. Out the door into the cold night. The sound of sirens in the distance. The stars above. Lights are on in windows across the way. A sense of normality returns, and I'm still really spooked but feel a lot better. So I open the security gate to the car park and go sit in my car. I turn the engine over, but it doesn't start. It's a pretty old car, prone to problems, so I'm not surprised. But my heart sinks. I turn the ignition again, but now the starter labors, and I can hear the battery dying. I should stop, but I don't. I keep turning the ignition until the battery doesn't even respond anymore, and there's just a redundant click. The next bus won't run until 7 or thereabouts. I can't afford a taxi. I don't have breakdown cover, and anyone I know who might usually help me out in a situation like this is tucked asleep in bed. And I'm not about to wake them up to come rescue me from a spooky room. So I go back to work, intending to catch the first bus when the service resumes. I'm beating myself a bit by the time I get to the refectory for being such an idiot. What is there to be nervous about? It's just a council office building. It's only the smoking room. It's just the nighttime and everything seems weird. I'm mostly scaring myself here, and I say to myself as I turn the corner from the refectory and into the quote corridor, then around the next corner. Which is when I see movement. The door to the old toilets is one of those fire doors with a sprung cantilever in the box above the door frame. You walk through and it closes slowly behind you on its own. The door is in for the process of closing. I freeze because there's only one possibility, that someone else is in the building with me. But why go in those old toilets? As far as I know, they don't even work, and when I wonder if someone early bird council worker came to throw some water on their face or something, I remember that there's no water even on tap here. I'm aware at this point I'm potentially the victim in a real-life horror, and the last thing I should do is open the door and investigate, so it's the first thing I do, obviously. The toilets are grim, modern, but disused. The light doesn't work, so I have to rely on the fluorescent glow coming from the corridor. There are cubicles, but who the hell would be taking a pee or a crap in the pitch dark? "Hello," I say in a jovial way. "Anyone in here?" My voice sounds stupid and jaunty, like this has come kind of routine for me. I stick the door open with a screwdriver underneath and venture in to check the cubicles. I know they're empty even as I'm checking, and they are. There's nobody there. Back in the smoking room, there's nobody there either. If whoever it was comes back towards the refectory, I'd have passed them in the corridor. The place was, and I can only conclude still is, completely deserted. Suffice to say, I pack up my things and get the shitballs out of there. I wind up walking 10 miles home. The next day, I call the contractor and say the job's just too shitty and I'm no good on night shifts. It's no big deal, I know, because it's a well-paid job and there are plenty of other subcontractors on his books who will gladly do it. My dad helps me rescue the car that afternoon. I work as a transporter in a hospital. About 2 years ago, we moved from the old city hospital into a new state-of-the-art facility. The old hospital was built in the 30s and was showing its age at a night and was just plain creepy. Each floor had an east and west wing. The east wing on the 4th floor was the first wing to be shut down about 2 weeks before the move. One night, around 9:30, I'm up on the floor to get a patient from the west wing. I see a small group of nurses and aides who all used to work on the now closed east wing. They looked visibly shaken. I walked over to see if everything was okay. They told me that they had decided to walk through their old wing for nostalgia's sake. When they were over there, the phone at the nurse's station started ringing. The computers and phones have not yet been moved. Not sure what to do, one of the nurses reached over the counter and answered the phone. The nurse told me there was a woman's voice on the other end that sounded confused. This is the conversation best I can remember. "This is blank, how can I help you?" asked the nurse. "Hello, who is this?" "This is blank. I'm a nurse, is there anything I can help you with?" "Where am I?" "This is hospital name, and are you a patient here?" "Oh, okay." Then the line went dead. That's when the nurse finally looked at the screen on the phone to see where the call was coming from. The phone gave the room number directly next to the nurse's station. The room by this point had all been cleared out and the phones removed. They could see directly into the room and see that there was nobody there. That's when they bolted towards the west wing where I was getting off the elevator. I avoided that wing for the rest of my time there. My mother started working at the hospital right out of college. It was the only job she had ever known. On moving day, she was determined to walk through every hallway before leaving for the last time. She had her camera and taking pictures as she went. On one of the empty patient wings, she stopped and was getting ready to take a picture, when the door right next to the room next to her slammed shut, as though someone on the other side had thrown the door as hard as they could. My mom decided she was done taking pictures. And this happened to me just last Friday. It was going on 10 and I was taking my last patient back to her room. She was a little old lady who was stable enough to ride in a wheelchair but needed assistance on her feet. I got her back to the room and helped her to bed. I made sure she was comfortable and set the bed alarm before turning off the lights and leaving the room. I pulled the curtain behind me to not let too much light in, but not all the way so that I could still see in her bed from the hallway. Her nurse was in the room next door and I needed to speak with her. While I was standing there waiting for the nurse to come out of the room, I distinctly saw a person walk past the curtain inside the old woman's room. The person was about the same height as the woman who had some gray hair. At first I thought, quote, "She should not be up and walking." Then I remembered the bed alarm I set. The room was silent and when I looked in, I could see her still laying in the exact same position I left her. She had not moved an inch and the bed alarm was still armed. That's when I got the most intense full-body chills of my life. The nurse came out of the other room and I gave her the message and then booked it out of there. I drive a truck and when I hauled steel, I would often run on paper logs, drive all day and well into the night. I do upwards of 1,000 miles in 19 hours a day, and the tail end of those trips was always a little harrowing. When you get within 10 to 20 miles of your destination and precise sleep, you get a sudden burst of energy. Just enough so that you know you'll make it and the risk of falling asleep at the wheel is no longer present. It's a nice feeling of satisfaction, but it does not come without a price. Hallucinations. For me, at least, that last breath of energy after a long run often brought with some crazy shit. To make matters worse, places where one might deliver sheet metal coils tend to be right directly inside the butt crap of fucking nowhere, and reaching them involve lots of two-lane roads through the woods. Combine narrow, twisting roads, hallucinations, paranoia about getting caught running illegal, and just enough energy to be aware of it all, you've got what it's like to call a situation on your hands. One particular night stands out. The 800 or so miles had been taken in about 17 hours thanks to the back hills and roads I've taken to get there. To as close as a place to rural New Jersey as it likely gets. Just across Delaware from Philly. I was coming down from a back-to-back dose of double shots and was about 15 minutes away from the 4 hours of sleep I would be getting that night. So, I was on edge and starting to see shit. My hallucinations weren't readily identifiable things like people or giant stacks of bacon and such, but vague flashes of movement and light. It was as if a fox wearing a suit strobing LEDs was about to dart out of the tree line. It freaked me out just enough that I usually had one foot on the clutch at all times in case I had to jam the brakes. I knew it wasn't real, but it still bothered me. In the midst of all this, I was rounding a bend and saw about a quarter mile down the road. It was a man standing in my lane. He had a green reflective vest on and was waving his arms. Too real and tangible to be a hallucination. I began to slow down, immediately wary of the situation, and the scene unfolded before I got closer. A mid-size SUV was on its side and the other side of the road, and a little pulled-off car of the forest was bristling with some sort of construction activity at the lively hour of 3 a.m. I said aloud, "What the fuck?" Then, from out of the trees burst a freaking bobcat. No, not the mountain lion ones, but one of those little four-wheeled mini excavator things commonly used in landscaping. It darted about with all the agility of its namesake, save for the moment when it turned to face the roof of the car where it nearly tipped over. The bobcat pushed the vehicle over and at least a dozen people crawled out. I stopped counting at 8. I was in a state of mental lapse and had no idea what happened. Finally, the guy in vest let me pass. My last 10 minutes or so of driving were marked by a sense of calm as I saw every cop car and ambulance in southern Jersey fly past me in the opposite direction, knowing they had something better to do than check my logs. I got to my destination safely and went to sleep. Midnight Monster here. That was 5 stories from graveyard shift workers. If you have any creepy or unbelievable things you've seen in the dead of night, do share your story and consider subscribing.